Welcome to the second day of 2022 ICAO Legal Seminar. And I should start off by saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, since we are joined by many people from all over the world through YouTube. I am unannounced Seoul Moon, and I will be joining you once more from yesterday as your master of ceremony. Seeing everyone's face just for 2 days straight make me feel as if I am part of ICAO's 75 years history, so that I shall hold this mic with utmost respect towards everyone. Then now we shall open the doors to the second day of the seminar with session 3. In this session, we shall discuss about aviation recovery, and there will be a Q&A time after each session. Our on-site participants may simply raise their hands when you have just questions, and we will pass off the mic. And would our viewers on YouTube channel please leave their questions on the comment section. It will be sent directly to each session's moderator. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we'll start session 3 on aviation recovery. Will be moderated by Stanislao Esona Angesimo, from representative of Equatorial Guinea to ICAO. Everyone, please welcome him with a big hand. So, sir, would you please start this session?
Good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where we are. This morning we are going to have a quite interesting topic, which basically it will also be a testimony why and where what we have been doing during this period with the so-called COVID. This morning, our topic will be the way forward, fostering recuperations. With me, I will be with Vice President Philippot. Vice President Philippot is well known as the IATA Vice President for Asia and Pacific. With us also will be Professor Lee. Professor Lee will be virtual and will participate virtually. And with us also we will be with Professor Lee also, but young Lee. The topic that we are going to develop this morning, one of them will be opened by the Vice President Philippot. Vice President Philippot will be able to share with us his experience during COVID, before COVID, and after COVID, and challenges that we have been facing from the perspective of industry. With this few remarks, I would like to invite Vice Presidents Paul to introduce the agenda items. Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Anguessomo. Good morning to all excellencies, delegates, industry colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me just say a few words about myself. Philip Goh is my name. I'm Regional Vice President for the International Air Transport Association for the Asia Pacific, and I'm based in Singapore. I've only been with IATA for roughly 6 months. And actually, this is my first business trip for IATA and for the last 2 years. But first, let me congratulate the Korea Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, and Transport for your 70 years of fantastic association and support of IATA, and also to the ICAO Legal Committee on your 75th anniversary. Thank you for the invitation to participate at such a momentous and great event. My IATA team in Korea, among the audience this morning, and I most thoroughly enjoyed last night's dinner commemorating the 75th anniversary of the ICAO Legal Committee. And I think I will speak for many people that Korea never ceases to impress with your spectacular cultural performances. And also the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport has done such a wonderful job with reopening your borders, and also by organizing this very important seminar. I think it's an important boost to aviation and also to the Korean economy. So thank you very much to the MOLIT. And before I start my presentation this morning, I like just to reflect on ICAO's theme of reconnecting the world. I think it brings us really to the crux of the immensely novel yet challenging task of bringing life back to civil aviation so that people no longer are separated. In fact, they once again can be reconnected. And I think aviation had grown massively over the past decades. And over that time, its critical role had perhaps come to be taken somewhat for granted. That it accounted for some $3.5 trillion of global economy, roughly the size of the GDP of the Netherlands or of Indonesia, that it employs some 87 million people, providing many livelihoods. And of course, now we are starting to see recovery, the green shoots of recovery, after 2 very, very difficult years. So the question is, how can aviation take off again? So this morning I will discuss the challenges facing the aviation industry as we recover, and also the need to recover sustainably. This is the outline of my address this morning. I will cover the challenges, and then looking at some industry outlook, and I'll talk a little bit about the blueprint, and then I'll move on to environment sustainability and financial resilience. So it has been 2 years since the start of the COVID-19 crisis, and this has been our industry's worst crisis. It has been very deep and also very long. And there are many challenges that the industry faces in the recovery phase from this crisis. I will highlight what I see as 4 of the main challenges, and of course, this list that I cover is by no means exhaustive. So challenge number one, the recovery will be slow. You will note from this chart, the good news is that cargo has made not only a swift recovery, but has become somewhat of a lifeline for many airlines. So as of January this year, cargo volume is already 5% more than that in January 2019. In fact, growth strengthened further in February and was 11.9% more than February of 2019. You look at the chart, the same cannot be said of passenger traffic. Not so rosy. The January RPKs are minus 50% compared to January of 2019, although February did increase to 54% of February 2019 levels. Domestic RPKs are not doing too badly at minus 26%, but the international RPKs are particularly hard hit at just minus 62% compared to January of 2019. The recovery of travel is uneven across various regions of the world. So you see that the Americas is recovering quite well. However, the Asia-Pacific region where we are in, still very far behind. In January, this region is minus 67% compared to January of 2019. And that, mind you, included very strong domestic recovery. Although having said that, the good news is that we are starting to see some fairly positive border reopening momentum being built in the past several weeks. And so we do expect the recovery pace to quicken in the following weeks and months. And I hope we'll be proven right in somewhat optimistic expectation. That brings me to challenge number 2. This chart shows ticket sales for travel since January 2021 to late February this year. Ticket sales is usually a good leading indicator for passenger traffic that follows. Well, you will see that ticket sales were impacted by the Omicron variant, the wave of Omicrons, and also, more recently, by the war in Ukraine. But you also notice that demand for future travel fell throughout December and January, started to recover in late January and in February, but then the Ukraine crisis has caused it to dip. Number 3, the complex and unpredictable travel rules around the world is not helping. I think we all agree that all of us, many people, we just want to travel. And we see that whenever governments announce border reopening, we see bookings surge, bookings grow very fast. But then the complex rules, restrictions, and the unpredictable nature of when governments announce new restrictions can, in fact, did discourage people from traveling. And the reality is that there is little or no correlation between travel restrictions on the one hand and the rise and fall of new reported COVID cases around the world, as you can see from the chart. And my final point in terms of challenge is the rising costs of aviation, particularly the rising jet fuel costs, jet fuel prices. As of 1st April this year, jet fuel price was about US $158 a barrel. And this is 137% more compared to just 1 year ago. And you will know that typically airlines would either absorb this increased cost or pass it on, either in whole or in part, to passengers who fly with them. But coming out of the COVID crisis, this in fact puts airlines in a very tight spot because increasing airfares to account for higher costs can in fact dampen or reduce demand for air travel, which is something that airlines do not want. We want to boost demand, we want to encourage travel, and so there's this, two sides of the coin. So the question is, how do we overcome so many hurdles? What is the outlook, and what are we advocating to states? IATA recently updated our passenger recovery forecast. The passenger numbers globally are expected to recover to pre-COVID levels in 2019, roughly around 2024, and reaching 4 billion passengers. This recovery will be driven by domestic travel improvements, which is expected to recover by 2023. So domestic will recover earlier. International passenger numbers will only recover around 2025. Recovery also varies across different regions. And given the slow pace of border reopening, at the time of this forecast, the Asia Pacific is expected to be among the slowest to recover, only in 2025. However, if reopening accelerates, as we have observed recently, there is no reason not to be hopeful of a slightly earlier full recovery. I'll quickly touch on the blueprint I referred to earlier. So we have seen some positive momentum in this region recently. More and more states have opened to quarantine-free travel for vaccinated people. And this chart shows the Asia-Pacific markets that allow quarantine-free travel. While we continue to work closely with other states in the region to open their borders and to sunset those travel restrictions that are no longer necessary or relevant. Time is catching up with me, so I'm going to move a little bit faster. So to help governments safely open their borders, IATA has developed a blueprint for reopening, and this was provided to states in November 2021. 3 areas of focus to highlight. Number 1 is simplified health protocols. Number 2, digital solutions to process health credentials. And then number 3, COVID-19 measures to be enacted proportionate to risk levels and with a continuous review process. That is to say, sunset those restrictions no longer required. We note that progress has been achieved on quarantine-free travel by and large, but then all is not done. Some major markets are still a bit far behind, and here, of course, we know that Japan remains largely close to leisure traffic. And of course, the next step for us is to remove testing that's needed to travel. Countries should review and remove tests that are no longer relevant due to very high domestic case numbers. The fact is, the lesser the requirements and restrictions to air travel, the simpler the rule for travel, the greater will be the appetite and the propensity for people to travel again. And it will be less cumbersome, less costly, certainly more predictable. And that will pave the way for a full recovery of air travel, I think starting with leisure, but in time also business travel. I now move on to the future. 2 quick points in the interest of time, environment sustainability and financial resilience. So an environment, I think we must build back better. We recognize that the industry needs to recover from COVID-19 and to do so in a more sustainable manner. The air transport industry approved the resolution to achieve net zero carbon emission by 2015 last year at the IATA AGM in Boston. And this is a challenging task which the industry must confront to work together with various stakeholders to contribute to containing the effects of climate change. We think there are 4 possible pathways to achieve net zero by 2050, and the bulk of it, we think, will come from achieving sustainable aviation fuel of sufficient quantity. Of course, new technologies in terms of airframes and propulsion systems, offsetting of carbon capture, and also improvements to infrastructure and operational processes. In a nutshell, the industry cannot do this on our own, and we need a collective effort that includes governments, states, producers of oil, investors, airports, and navigation service providers, and so on. Finally, on building back better in terms of financial resilience. So the industry is coming out of COVID-19 financially much weaker. Record high debt of $650 billion, a lot of it new debt, and also some of it government support, of which roughly half needs to be paid back. And the industry needs to build financial resilience, which means rebuilding their networks, restoring their top-line revenues, tackling the cost of operations, including the rising fuel costs, and of course, improving efficiencies of operations. And one of the cost burdens in the future is costs associated with investing for sustainability, whether acquiring new equipment, investing in higher cost staff, and others. And so building back better will be a key challenge and definitely a priority for all airlines globally. So in concluding, as the industry starts to recover from this crisis, this big downturn, it will face many challenges, both immediate short-term ones as well as longer-term challenges. But I think civil aviation has gone through many shocks before and has every time bounced back stronger. And we can do this again. States, industry, and global organizations must coordinate better, collaborate better, so as to overcome all the current challenges we face and also the future challenges that is to come. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well said. We will will call the next speaker and we wait for our questions till the third speaker will be able to share with us his experience in terms of transparency in the post-endemic airlines. And I would like to call on Professor Jung-Won Lee to work with us. What exactly are we expecting ahead? We have heard about challenges. We have heard about interconnectivity. We have heard also what exactly is waiting for us. So out of this darkness, there is a light. And one of the reasons why we're here today is a clear example that aviation has passed different steps, different challenges, but always we have been able to survive. So, Professor Lee, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to speak at the ICAO legal seminar. I would like to thank Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport for your kind invitation. I'm usually to the point speaker, but I have to say a few words before I speak on my topic. But rest assured that I will stay within the time limit. One source of great pride in my life is the fact that I have attended all of the ICAO legal seminars in Korea in 2006, 2009, 2012, 2015, 2018, and 2022. It's a pity that I have to join you today virtually. I wish I were there in person to see so many familiar faces. My university semester has not ended yet, and there's a quarantine requirement on my arrival in Hong Kong. I know we will discuss quarantine restriction further in our session by following speaker, Dr. Lee. And there are many distinguished guests from abroad in the room. As a Korean, I would like to welcome all of you. I want to welcome particularly Mr. Juan Carlos Salazar and Mr. Michael Gill, because this is their first trip to Korea in their new position as Secretary General and Legal Bureau Director of ICAO. I first met Juan and Michael 15 years ago in 2007. We have been in touch ever since. As a long-time friends, I want to say to our Korean audience in Korean, 후안과 마이클은 정말 좋은 사람들이고 가슴이 따뜻한 신사들입니다. Meaning, Juan and Michael are genuinely good people and warm-hearted gentlemen. Now I'm back to my main role. Let me share my slide. So my topic today is improving transparency in the post-pandemic airline industry. So after briefing you on the background of the topic, I will categorize the types of bailouts in the COVID-19 slump and explain the relevant relevant international conventions. I will then point out CART report recommendation 10, which by the way, our moderator was deeply involved with, followed by recommendation for better economic governance in the post-pandemic era with a focus on transparency. Then I will conclude with the key takeaways. As the previous speaker, Mr. Ko, rightly sketched out, the COVID-19 presents the airline industry with unprecedented challenges. This capital-intensive and labor-intensive industry continues to incur high fixed and variable costs, including aircraft leases, airport parking, and employee wages, despite the devastating market conditions. Since almost no airline could survive without financial support, airlines have called on government for bailout. Given airlines' importance to the economy, which include providing connectivity, preserving jobs, supporting related sectors, it is understandable why many governments have given local airlines financial support since early 2020. At the same time, there's ongoing debate as to whether and to what extent and how long government should financially support the airline industry. This is an important policy question, but this is not the focus of my presentation. My focus is that airline bailouts cause increasing problems for fair competition in the air transport market. Many countries have provided pandemic-related government support to their airlines since early 2020. Due to the time limit, I will be brief on this slide. You can find a detailed analysis in my article, which you can access in Google with the title of this presentation and my name, or you can just email me. I'll just forward it to you. The most accessible form of external finance is a loan from financial institution, but the COVID-19 crisis affected airline credit rates, and they needed immediate financial support to stay afloat. Thus, multiple governments have decided to extend loans and guarantee loans in a different form to the airline industry or specific airlines. Equity acquisition means a government becoming a shareholder of an airline. State ownership is a common practice in the airline industry. In the past 2 decades, however, privatization has been one of the main factors driving the restructuring of the global aviation industry. Facing unprecedented challenge during COVID-19 crisis, many airlines either become state-owned for the first time, or the government increased their stake in response. Some governments bail out the airline in the form of hybrid instrument that hybrid combines the feature of both debt and equity. These instruments have grown so complex that it has become virtually impossible to classify. But convertible bonds are the classic example of such instrument. And one of the main goals of government bailout or airline is protecting their jobs that airline provide. As we know, major airlines have tens of thousands of employees. Wage subsidy have been implemented in 2 ways. Some governments have given airline employees subsidy directly. Other governments have taken the indirect approach of financially supporting airlines on the condition that they keep employees on the payroll. Lastly, ensuring essential connectivity during pandemic is another goal for the government bailout for airline. Hence, some government provides flight subsidy to maintain essential connectivity. So although it is well understood why many governments cannot allow their major airlines to shut down, the ongoing massive government bailout can distort competition in the airline industry. The question is how to maintain level playing field in the international aviation market. While airlines with strong government support will be able to better survive the COVID-19 slump, airlines that do not receive state aid will struggle to overcome the distortion caused by this bailout. This is a difficult question and difficult problem because there's no legally binding international treaty regulating such state aid, no matter how unfair it may seem. We have WTO agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures at WTO SCM, but this SCM agreement applies only to subsidy on trade in goods, and it does not apply to subsidy to service providers and consumers. Therefore, it is not applicable to airlines' air transport services. Let me bring your attention to Chicago Convention, our Chicago Convention, Article 54. In paragraph I, the Chicago Convention empowered the ICAO Council to request, collect, examine, and publish information relating to the particular of subsidy paid to airline from public funds. I have a Chicago Conference minutes. I received this from my late mentor, Dr. Michael Milde, who was a former ICAO legal director. And I have read the Chicago Conference minute to find the origin of the paragraph, but I couldn't find it. The origin of this language is unknown, and there's no record so far of the ICAO Council making a decision on the paragraph I of Article 54. In other words, ICAO Council's monitoring function on subsidy has been dormant since 1947. What about air service agreements? Government bailouts have not fallen under the scope of air service agreement, with a few exceptions. I'll explain the few exceptions later on. In the 1960s, language about fair opportunity, which may include the concept of subsidies, but it began to regularly appear in air service agreements. Typical wording is the quote, "There shall be a fair and equal opportunity for the designated airlines of both contracting parties to operate the agreed services," end quote. However, the fair and equal opportunity to operate this clause was understood simply to mean balanced operations. In the early 1990s, new perspective formed about bilateral air service agreements. As the market was being deregulated and liberalized, principle of fair competition became more important. And consequently, the fair and equal opportunity to operate clause was replaced with new wording, fair and equal opportunity to compete. Therefore, the focus is no longer ensuring each side has the same number of available air services, but rather considering whether each side has fair and equal conditions. In other words, the key question is now whether there's a level playing field. However, even the fair equal opportunity to compete clause has been criticized for its ambiguity, and particularly because it is not capable of dealing with subsidies. It's important to mention the work of ICAO Council's Aviation Recovery Task Force, CART. So CART provides practical guidance to government and industry in order to help the international transport sector recover from the impact of COVID-19. The principle of fair competition was explicitly mentioned in CART Recommendation 10. What I like about this recommendation is that it emphasizes transparency. Let's face it, government bailout is a complicated issue. I'm not naively suggesting a major legal reforms, but I believe transparency can be significantly improved through the following recommendations. When the international aviation market eventually rebounds, the various pandemic-related government bailouts will cause controversies. One of the major problems with government bailout of airline is a lack of transparency. Information about this bailout is scattered and underreported, and there's no centralized place for other governments or the public to access the information. As a consequence, there will be controversy or even conflict about the fact. That means whether and to what extent the airlines in question have received bailout from their government. In my view, ICAO is the organization that is best positioned to serve as a central repository for the information. Not only does it have a mandate under the Chicago Convention, but it also has considerable experience with requesting, collecting, examining, and publishing information from member states. In other fields, such as aviation safety. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that aviation safety and fair competition in aviation should receive the same priority. They are starkly different. But I'm emphasizing ICAO's institutional experience. Nearly all air service agreements only have ambiguous fair and equal opportunity clause, but no subsidy clause. The unprecedented challenge for COVID-19 pandemic provides an opportunity to review what changes may be needed in the aviation market. For more rule-based approach, government negotiators should add a subsidy-specific clause to the air service agreements. In fact, there are some exceptions, some air service agreements that include specific subsidy clause. That can be a good model. Let me conclude. So for both economic and non-economic reasons, many governments cannot allow their major airline to shut down. Nevertheless, competition in international aviation market can be distorted by ongoing government bailout. Government should strike a balance between fine support to the airline industry and need to maintain competition. And bailout should not be entirely unregulated. The rule-based, once again, rule-based approach and institutional mechanism should be implemented to maintain maintain fair competition in international air transport. To sum up, the COVID-19 crisis should be seen as an opportunity to design better governance for the future of aviation market. Thank you. 감사합니다.
Thank you. Good said, well said. Before giving the floor to audience, I would like to pass to our next speaker. A lot has been said. I know that all of you are waiting patiently. From one side, we talk about challenges. On the other side, we talk about transparency. Now, we are going to listen to our next speaker, who is going to take us to aircraft movement, quarantines, public health corridors, and during and before COVID. I would like to invite Professor J. Miss Lee to introduce the third agenda items before opening the floor.
Okay, my name is Hyungmin Lee and work for several hospital as a physician. For major in clinical microbiology, I have read COVID-19 task force in Korean Society for Laboratory Medicine, and it's my honor to be invited to this meaningful conference to discuss aviation recovery. I'm so sorry, some technical issue. I had better start my talk.
Still face some difficulties. Hello? Are we there? Okay. Do we have any technician here who can address this issue?
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's start the next slide. At the first report of the COVID-19, it became a pandemic through 2020. Currently, nearly 500 million people have been suffered from this novel infection, and more than 6 million infected cases died of COVID-19. The world has recently experienced a pandemic caused by Omicron variant, despite vaccinations that started in December 2020. And we are now entering the year of the end of the Omicron epidemics. Although the number of deaths due to vaccination has decreased, the emergence of a new variant, such as Omicron, still poses a large number of deaths, indicating that attention should be paid to new variant in the future. And in today's lecture, In addition to responding to variants, I would like to propose some issues necessary to overcome COVID-19 and recover aviation. First, I would like to talk about expanding the concept of the quarantine system. This picture shows how COVID-19 spread within Europe and the United States in early 2020. In the case of Italy and the UK, which experienced a severe epidemics in early 2020, it showed that there was a large influx of COVID-19 outside of Japan, which contrary to our prediction, is spreading more rapidly worldwide. We believe this spread is due to the limitations of the current quarantine systems. According to this paper, published in Eurosurveillance in 2020, with the traditional airport quarantine, about half of COVID-19 cases coming from abroad were not confirmed in airport quarantine. This is due to the incubation period and individual characteristics. And confirmed cases not detected in airport quarantine cause community infection and spreading. And are confirmed cases through the general medical systems. Therefore, in addition to crash quarantine system, it is necessary to expand our quarantine system to national reporting or monitoring system through the usual medical system for infectious disease. Medical staff who discover infectious disease that is not common in a given country must check whether the patient is a foreigner or a person who has been to a foreign country. And in this case, they should report the new infections to the countries. In order to establish such a system, it is necessary to establish an appropriate education and diagnostic system to quickly respond to a new infectious disease in the future. And next, we had better focus the current issues COVID-19. The recent spread of Omicron mutations has created more impacted people than ever before. And these infections have been reported in Europe and Western Pacific region, including Korea. And this region were known as the vaccination rate are very high. Fortunately, pandemics caused by Omicron variant are declining in key regions, but many are still infected and dying. Then, will the COVID-19 pandemic and when the pandemic caused by Omicron variant is over, and will we be able to return to our daily lives, including aviations? The answer is not sure. A report released in March, led by the University of Pennsylvania in the United States, include predictions about the future of COVID-19 in the United States. And this report predict that in the most positive scenario, 20% of the population will become infected each year, and 0.03% will die, and resulting in an annual death toll ranging from 15,000 to 30,000 in every year. And according to the worst case scenario, 80% of the population will be infected each year, and between 100,000 and 300,000 people will die in every year. This prediction is largely determined by two factors. One is the immunity of the population, and the other is the change in virus virulence caused by the mutations. The damage is likely to increase as the group's immunity decrease, or COVID-19 and increase of COVID-19 virulence, including evading immunity or increasing virulence. In order to minimize such damage, it is necessary to make an effort to increase the immunity of the population or community, and to prevent the emergence and spread of mutations. In order to increase the immunity of the group or community or nations, efforts should be made to implement the vaccination worldwide. And to prevent the spread of the mutant, variant, it is necessary to monitor and block the spread between countries. And the variant can evade immunity, may cause severe infections. But in this situation, we don't need to do infection prevention because of vaccinations. So we need to block the occurrence of severe infections in major communities. So foreign import-related quarantine measures should be determined according to each country's situation based on the COVID-19 burden and vaccinations. In my thought, traveling from low to high prevalent countries does not require quarantine measures except for some political issues. However, traveling from low to high prevalent countries or the countries who have the highly virulent variant may be implemented containment measures consisting of testing or self-isolations. But this decision should be made according to each country's situations. For this reason, many countries implement quarantine measures, including self-quarantine or testing, to block the foreign import of COVID-19. However, this containment measure can be differ by each country's situations and for the purpose of aviation and resource further measurement. And we also prepare vaccine and increase the immunity in communities for 2 years. So we don't need to block COVID-19 strictly, but decrease the burden of import by testings. And also we need the quarantine system make the flexible according to severity or emerging COVID-19 variant from blocking to reduction of import. And pre or post-flight testing can prevent viral transmission during travel and delay the introduction and further spread at the place of arrival. And also monitor the introduction and further spread of variant of concern at the place of arrivals. So in current situation, self-isolation do not required in most cases, but pre or post-flight testing may be required to block or delay the reintroduction of this virus in many countries. However, it is very difficult problem in reality to test all people who use aviation. So we need a new test method or surveillance method, and we need to develop it. For example, in some countries, samples are collected from the restrooms of airplanes that have been outside of service is used to monitor the entry of infectious diseases such as cholera. Similarly, if a filter that can collect the air circulated inside an aircraft and rest aircraft, and this can be used to check the respiratory virus. It seems that it can be very good tools to monitor the virus import in airplanes. And research and development should be required to use this method to usually to monitor the respiratory virus in each airplanes. A final topic to propose for air recovery is medical support for international visitors. COVID-19 is expected to be with mankind in an epidemic state in the futures. Therefore, there is a possibility of being infected with COVID-19 at any time according to the occurrence of COVID-19 variant or decrease in immunities. So the risk of severe COVID-19 infection especially against unvaccinated person during foreign visit, is keep going. So medical support for COVID-19 for impacted visitors is required, including medical translators, insurance system, and getting medical record for the patient from his own countries. And also recommendation for vaccination for persons who are going to visit foreign countries is required. And finally, easy access for COVID-19 testing is also needed. And this is my final conclusion. Expansion of quarantine system should be required to prepare future epidemics. And COVID-19 variant variant can continue to be a threat in the near future. And so free and post-flight testing can be helpful to prevent the spreading of COVID-19 variant for a while. But we need more advanced technique and investigations. And medical support is needed for critically ill patients infected with COVID-19 while traveling. And COVID-19 vaccination should be recommended before traveling. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, let me recap what has come out with our three speakers. The first ones, he pointed out clearly the challenges ahead of us. The second speaker was able to work with us the importance of transparency in funding some company. And the last speakers, he worked with us throughout the public health corridors, including quarantines and the airlines and cargos. The floor is open. I think today we had an opportunity to listen scholars and professionals in each separate area of COVID. But there is very important points which we need to highlight. The harmonization of practices is still be a problem. Indeed, during CAT and during the beginning of COVID, it was almost mission impossible to think that we can get together as we are now today in this big hall. But thanks to the common effort, collective effort, which was put in place by trying to put certain measures, for example, testings, protocols, recommendations, 20 recommendations, 10 principles from CAT, the collaboration of industry, the collaboration of states, private sector, and so on, we have been able to put certain initiative which gradually we are getting used to them, but the problem is still there. What is the problem? Lack of harmonizations, the passenger confidence to travel, and costing. With these few remarks, I would like to open the floor to make questions to the first speaker, second, and third speaker. The floor is open. Okay. Yes, right side, behind, you have a, yeah, behind. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your such a well-organized presentation, especially Philip Goh, who was very handy information for the understanding future trend of the aviation market. My question is it's a lot of countries now are lowering traveling barriers, and a lot of people wish to overseas traveling as a coming summer season. as a vacation. I'm from Asian Airlines. As airliners, how do we prepare for coming summer season? What I mean is that if we over prepared, then we may waste our effort. If we are under prepared, then we may lose our opportunities. So if you have any idea or clue to refer to preparation for us, it will be great help for everybody in this room. Thank you.
Philip, over to you. How are we ready for holidays, and what could we share with the public? What can be done? Over to you.
Thank you very much. It's an excellent question. I think that there are a couple of things here. One is that individual airlines obviously have their own system of getting their network back to a level that allows them to operate scheduled services to those places that would generate for them the traffic numbers, and obviously working towards a peak season like the summer is critical for many airlines. So individual airlines will have to ensure that they are able to ramp up safely, as well as that their human resource, their staff numbers are able to cope with increased level of activity after 2 very long years of a deep slump. The other factor, which unfortunately is not within the airline's control, really has to do with the level of restrictions that some states may continue to impose on travel. And to the extent that you can now pretty much travel to quite a lot of places without having to quarantine, if you you have a family traveling 4 or 5 or 6 people, then the cost for travel adds up very quickly when you have to do all sorts of tests, right? Before you leave and when you arrive. So IATA continues to advocate that where this kind of restrictions are no longer relevant, that states should sunset them, should remove them. So following from quarantine-free travel, we would like to see a drastic reduction in testing. If some tests may still be required, then maybe they should move from PCRs to antigen testing, which is much faster and much lower in terms of cost. So I think those kind of things which are not within the airline's control, industry bodies like IATA, ICAO certainly can continue to advocate so that the airline system can ramp up to the levels that would see them return back to a more normal way of operating, and also carrying more people, who wants just to reconnect and get to where they want to go during the summer break. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Hello. We have one hand left. Can we pass microphone to left side? Yes.
Thank you very much. Andrew Salmon, Asia Times. My question is also for Philip. 3 questions, in fact. One, why is Asia Pacific such a slow recoverer among the various international regions? 2, looking at today, we have conferencing technology. Not every participant is here. So will business travel and the MICE industry ever fully recover? And thirdly, your slides have pointed out the fall in demand. What about the fall in supply? Do we have any information on how many airlines have gone out of business, how many staff have been retired, how many aircraft have been retired from the global fleet? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. So, number one is to understand Asia Pacific. I think you have to go back to the history of the region. And if I could help us recall, Asia was very badly hit by the SARS outbreak of 2003. Parts of Canada, I think, as well, but mainly Asian economies. And that experience, I think, was quite instructive to Asian societies, and governments were quite quick when the pandemic happened to close their borders, because the importation of a disease of this sort had ravaged their societies way back, all those years ago. And I would have to say that the early action had been effective in containing spread, unlike the many Western societies when you see huge spikes in infection numbers. So having that as the kind of a backdrop, you can understand that the cautiousness in which many states had adopted during the early part of the pandemic. And of course, because they were perhaps so comfortable in being in a cocoon and a slower acquisition of vaccines, the states here are relatively slower in reopening. So that is the backdrop, and I think that helps us to understand the psychology of why things are at this time. But having said that, as we've observed, many states in this region have started to open up, albeit that you still require a number of tests, to travel. But hopefully those will come down as well. On the improvements in technology adoption, video conferencing and such like, I think that not just the business people, but leisure folks and people who reconnect with their families are really, in the last 2 years, learned a great deal from how to connect with their friends, families without the ability to travel. So teleconferencing and video conferencing definitely had helped things to continue to operate during a time that the aviation system was shut down. I think that people get quite used and comfortable to this mode of communicating now. So it's possible that business travel will take some time to revert back to the state at which they were in 2019. But you can't really substitute an in-person event like this with a Zoom conference, right? And I'm sure that our professors would agree they'd rather be here than video conferencing from far away. So I think business segment of the market will return, although it will take them longer, and perhaps internal meetings, many of them may still continue to be operated this way. And so companies will learn how to operate their travel budgets in a way that maybe facilitate more of the external engagements with their customers and with their partners, more so than the internal ones. I'm not saying internal meetings are not important, but when they have to prioritize, you might see more business travels being done just because of the savings from internal. That's just my personal opinion, by the way. And then lastly, in terms of supply, the ecosystem had been shut down for a long time. Many airlines park their airplanes in the desert, long-term parking and storage. And so all this takes time to be brought back safely. And as we speak, I'm quite sure that many airlines continue to find difficulty to ensure that when aircraft are brought back, they are brought back to a level that for safe operations. And as they start operating those aircraft that are parked for a long time, I'm sure they will find that all kinds of issues and faults that might appear that were not anticipated, and so it will take some time to ramp all this thing up. Besides human resource, staff issues, people who are infected by COVID and therefore not able to work, and all that will have a bearing on how fast the supply reverts back. But during the time that airlines were capacity was in cold storage, they are not sitting on their hands. I'm sure many airlines in this room, many airlines in the world have made plans how to revert back their capacity as quickly as they can, based on the expectation of how they see the capacity reverting and their ability to operate. So I'm fairly certain that all the airlines fairly well equipped and prepared. But what is needed to be happened is for borders to really open with the least number of restrictions possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can see the midway behind, 2 hands up, and we close the question. Behind, the last one. The middle. Yes. The three hands up. Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. My name is Helena. I'm representing Korea Aerospace University as a student. And in the same time, I'm representing Kazakhstan. I'm director of Route Development Department. And I was waiting this session because it's very important for me as an aviator here. So, in Kazakhstan, in my case, our passenger traffic was decreased for 55%, international passenger traffic, almost the same numbers as worldwide trend. But I remember that from 2020, IATA started to implement IATA Travel Pass. My question to Mr. Philip Go, can you share with us how things going with implementation of IATA Travel Pass in different countries? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's a great question. Yeah, I think that sometime in 2020, there really is a realization that we need digital solutions to help us to overcome the many challenges, particularly to do with health credentials, carrying health credentials, test certificates and all of that. So IATA had gone ahead to kind of develop a digital platform that airlines could use, passengers could use. And that moved on at a pace in last year. More recently, and obviously, airlines started to sign up, they started to do trials and all of that. And it is not only solution, by the way. There are other platforms, there are other solutions in the market. As we move along the different phases of this pandemic, and in large Western countries, people are starting to take it as an endemic late last year towards into this year. We are seeing that in the large travel markets, there are less and less requirement for some of these testing, for example. Well, you still need to carry your vaccination certificate most of the time when you travel, but many countries have started started to drop the requirement for testing, right? Whether it's on-arrival testing and also pre-departure testing. Now, I think that has an impact on the usefulness of digital solutions such as this. So as the endemic situations start to be accepted across the world and in Asia Pacific, we are already seeing more and more governments take that position. You will see those barriers start to come down, and of course we hope that it come down faster than slower. When those barriers are removed and you no longer have to do your testing, then you probably need it for carrying your health vaccine certificate. And the question is, do you need an elaborate tool to do that? As far as the travel pass is concerned, the decision right now is based on what we are seeing in the market, that we will not continue to make any more enhancements to that product. We will keep it as it is today, make the functions that are within that digital platform stable, and keep it at that. It nevertheless remains to be a very important tool for contactless travel, and there is a future to contactless travel, and this would be a very good platform, a springboard to future plans for advancing contactless travel. So travel pass will be there. We are not going to make any more enhancements to it. Airlines can use it, passengers can use it according to how airlines want to adopt it. But we will use that to develop future solutions for contactless travel. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one speaker behind, two hands behind, and one in front.
Thank you very much. My name is Papa from Ghana Civil Aviation Authority and Korea Aerospace University. My question is to Professor Jae-Woon Lee. Yeah, you made very good recommendations about including subsidy-specific clauses in the air service agreements. I want to know, what is your take on this? Considering actually including subsidies to service in the SCM scope from the WTO perspective, and maybe leveraging organizations like the OECD. Maybe ICAO can collaborate with organizations like the OECD to make it like global, from a global perspective. Wouldn't that be more efficient? What do you think?
Thank you. Excellent question. Point, on the OECD or WTO level, there has been discussion to include air service, but there's so strong resistance from states saying that as far as aviation is concerned, we want to discuss it within ICAO. So in theory, yes, you can obviously say that why not include air services when you discuss services? But in reality, I don't think it will be achieved in the near future. So short answer to you is that OECD, WTO can have a look, can study on it, but I don't see any political willingness from state side to include air transport in the within big scheme of service sector. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's get one more question in front. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is to Professor Jae-Woon Lee. You had made a very excellent presentation, and thank you for all your inputs. My question is regarding the fact that, as you very well said, that the support to the airline industry by the governments have raised the issue of unfair competition as well as distortion of level playing field. There are many countries who are not able to afford such a support, and it is likely that in future they may lose a part of the market or the routes in international aviation, which is likely to lead to a reversal of trend of liberalization. I think what ICAO has been promoting is liberalization of air transport, and this is, I think, the key to increase the aviation altogether. So how do you think ICAO at this point can play a balancing act in rising to the needs of the time of giving subsidy to the airlines, but at the same time ensuring that there is no fallout of long-term market distortion? Thank you.
Thank you. So it's important to observe COVID-19 from kind of macro level. As you know, is that liberalization, deregulation has been the key word in air transport for the past two decades. In a way, COVID-19 is reversing the trend by including state ownership and maybe some sense of protectionism. So that is to some degree understandable because government really wanted to survive their local airlines. So to answer your question, of course, very difficult question, but what I want to suggest is again, the transparency. Even if you cannot solve the problem fundamentally, it's important to maintain rule-based the framework or institutional the starting point to show that transparency is guaranteed. And another point I want to mention is so-called competitive neutrality. This is a concept supported by OECD. That means government should not discriminate state-owned company and non-state-owned company that include your domestic airline but privately owned. So just to maintain the level of fairness to all airlines you are regulating. That can be a good starting point, but of course, very difficult question. But I want to emphasize that not only the points I mentioned, the Article 54 Air Service Agreement, let's not forget the preamble of Chicago Convention. It also emphasized opportunity, equal opportunity to compete in the international air transport market. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we are passing to, we could continue like this almost up to 11 or 12 o'clock, but our time is over. First of all, I would like to request all of you to give a big applause to our three presenters that they have done excellent job this morning. And let me set towards what we can take with us. Indeed, recovery will continue to require intersectoral collaboration and dialogue. Recovery will require leadership, solidarity, transparency, and open dialogue. And this is a collective effort. Of course, we should always include a political will. 2020, it was, I will say, it's one of a year in the history of mankind that we could not compare it because when everything was paralyzed. But as of today, we could say we are in the middle of a tunnel, but we see the light ahead. I think the collective effort, the political will, the measures put in place, including higher harmonizations, it will take us more than what we are thinking. It will take us far away, and we will be able to say, yes, gradually the recovery is coming. The recovery is among us. And also, there is one important part which we are witnesses. We wish to talk, or we continue talking about pandemic, but pandemics, it seems to be gradually to become endemic. So we need to continue, start living with COVID. And living with COVID, it means to set innovating, we have new way of thinking, new way of doing things. With these few remarks, I wanted to thank you once again. I wanted to thank the government of Korea for the excellent meetings, organized legal meeting, and to bring so many scholars and speakers to talk issues of common interest, from law, from civil society, from economic, from cultural point of view, and from health. I want to thank you all, and we see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We need another big round of applause to our moderator and panelists for the great presentation and debate. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, the pandemic situation caused by COVID-19 brought many difficulties to Skyward worldwide. But if we think together and share ways to go back faster yet safely, I believe we could normalize the situation more quickly. So now this brings us to the end of session 3. After about a 10-minute break, we would like to start again the session. Please sit back by 11:10 for the session 4. Thank you.